start with the Quran. So just to give a sort of threshold that a barrier should never be overcome, apropos of the values of democracy and of Europe in a context now that is more and more evolving. So it seems to me interesting.
Somebody else before. Thank you so much. You made me think about so many possibilities now for the classroom. One thing I'm interested in, and I'm going back to Gardafè, Alessandro mentioned him, who's been talking a lot about the irony deficiency in sometimes the American context, in particular among young people, and I apologize for the generalization, but it's probably something that we all experience in the classroom when we crack a certain subtle joke and it goes completely lost, or maybe sometimes misunderstood. And Sciascia is so much about irony, right? Even in the text that you mentioned, I'm thinking of La zia d'America, no? Lo zio when he says l'America con tutte queste cose così ricca non poteva che vincere la guerra, no? And something I didn't get a chance actually to say the other night is that in Le Long Crossing, which I mentioned actually comes from a story that he heard from the lawyer that defended the human trafficker. He was assigned as avvocato d'ufficio, and as a matter of fact, they developed a relationship. And the lawyer was pretty good when he defended him, although he ended up in prison for a while. But the actual trafficker told him, se l'avessi conosciuto prima, avvocato, io le avrei chiesto di lavorare con me. So I wonder, how would it be possible to sometimes include these moments coming from Sciascia, right? I mean, because this is, really pushing the boundary, right? And I was wondering if, in your experience, sometimes this irony is lost or, misunderstood, and how to deal with that.
I have to confess, I'm actually pretty bad at conveying humor in English, and that happens not only with Kafka, not only with Sciascia, but also with Kafka. When I teach the Metamorphoses, which to an American audience, and I think the translation plays an important role in that. It reads in English like a very tragic history that is a prelude to the Holocaust, because in German it's the Ungeziefer, which is exactly the same term that the Nazis will use 20 years later. And so to an American audience in the translation, in the various translations of Kafka, that is a very pessimistic and dark text. In the German, it's so funny because it's this giant bug who wakes up and his first thinking is, I'm gonna miss my 7 o'clock train, right? And he doesn't really care about the fact that he is a giant cockroach. And in Sciascia, I kind of have the same kind of problem. The kind of funny part transpires sometimes in Il Consiglio d'Egitto. L'Abate Vella. He is adorable. He's adorable. He's such a wonderful, wonderful character, and it appears there. And I try to kind of infuse the classroom with a little bit of lightheartedness, and that's a pedagogical strategy, right? I think the students are there; they take it very seriously, but I don't know that it is always conducive to learning. I want to create an environment in which they're relaxed. And I think that the more relaxed they are, the more they learn. It's kind of part of my convincing strategy. But you're right, the kind of, I have to point it out to them. It's like, okay, guys, this is funny, please laugh.
I found your talk extremely interesting, and thank you very much for it. As I was listening to you, granted the number, and I was very impressed by this, the number of various issues which you raised for you or for your students, I was reminded of a statement by T.S. Eliot, who said that any great writer, and I'll certainly include Sciascia in that category, stands at the very center of, he said, European, let's say a Western culture, And that's very true of Sciascia when we consider the number of writers who appear in his work and who've been of great importance to him. But I wish to go on to a slightly different point which came out. You said that some of your students reading it saw parallels with Trump and what's happening in America. And of course what's happening and what Trump represents is something all over the Western world, very unfortunately. I prefer not to use the word fascism, but certainly a new form of authoritarianism, which is deeply anti-liberal, is now emerging in various countries, including Britain, more obviously in Hungary, also in Spain, and we'll see what happens, as you said, in Italy on this Sunday. So it's interesting that Sciascia is now recovering a particular relevant or raising questions related to the situation, dangerous situation which we're facing today. But look, if you'll permit me, what I really wanted to go on was to ask a slightly different question. I think as part of this new authoritarianism, there are very real risks to freedom of speech all over the Western world, certainly in Britain, certainly in America. I'm actually not sure that the danger is quite as acute in Italy, but let's leave that for just now. When we discover that people like J.K. Rowling, for example, is now being banned, Gone with the Wind is now taken as a novel which we can't even talk about. It is regarded as so utterly unspeakable and can no longer be seen in a particular historical context. And in the universities, to an appalling degree, and I'm talking now about Scotland and England, then there are various books which have to be taken off the curriculum, and this includes classics, or alternatively they have to be accompanied by what's called a trigger warning. That includes even Othello, for example, that the treatment of Desdemona, or Desdemona, in that is regarded as altogether dangerous and unacceptable way of treating a woman, which no doubt it is, but these things do happen in life and should be there. What I want to ask you is, do you fear that this could eventually happen to Sciascia, granted that he deals with violence in particular? He doesn't encourage it, but very few writers of any value do. Have you already encountered this problem, or do you fear that it might arise for Sciascia and for many other comparable writers, some of whom we may regard as classics, some of whom are contemporary writers who do deal with delicate problems of violence, of racism, of sexism, or whatever it is, and who are then liable to be excluded from adult, mature conversation because they deal with these problems sometimes in a way that we might conceive as being acceptable, but the very fact of discussing them makes them unacceptable in these new illiberal quarters.
I don't see Sciascia in imminent danger of any kind of censorship. Yes, exactly. At least not now. I don't think he is shiny enough, right? He's not as recognizable, and I'm assuming that in the 60s, 70s, 80s it was probably a different situation. But I see what you're saying here about the kind of slippery slope. But if at some point we kind of have to face the kind of elephant in the room, right? And I do not shy away as a cultural historian to call this fascism, because the ingredients are all there, and as we say in the United States, you know, if it walks like a duck and it quacks like a duck, it probably is a duck. The issue, I think, is not simply banning this or that book. I think the attack in the end is on the liberal arts and the humanities in general, because, and it's not just a question of funding, because what book that we usually teach does not talk about sensitive issues, right? I mean, because in many ways this is what we do as teachers, right? We raise kind of uncomfortable points, the literature, the world literature, good literature, is the one that talks about sexism, you know, racism, colonialism, nationalism, and it is full of particular triggers. I don't do trigger warnings to my students. I tell them I don't believe in trigger warnings because I say, it's not just about you. I said, what about me? Do you think about things that may trigger your professors? Because we are triggered all the time, and yet we're teaching it. And so, in the same way that I kind of try to develop a professional demeanor and talk about things that trigger me, I hope that you accept the fact that in a public arena, we can discuss things that are publicly relevant and kind of keep our private kind of feelings about something again in the private sphere. I have actually a funny story to tell about that kind of phenomenon that you were discussing. I years ago won a teaching award, and I was very happy, and it was wonderful and great. And the student who had nominated me after the ceremony said, you know, I think you're just such a great teacher because you taught Ovid. I said, what do you mean? It turns out that this was a right-wing extremist student who had heard about how, I can't remember at what university, the students had rebelled against Ovid because Ovid is all about sexual violence, and that they wanted to take Ovid off the curriculum. And I had taught Ovid that semester. And the students interpreted my teaching of Ovid as a right-wing gesture of going against. And so that kind of teaching award kind of was like, oh, I'm happy, but I think I won for the wrong reason. And so it's really interesting in teaching that I sometimes feel like I hope that what is coming across is actually what I intend, and there's often that kind of misunderstanding. So I thought that was kind of a funny coda to your question. So thank you.
Stefano.
Thank you for your presentation. It was really, really helpful. About again the day of the owl, what is the reaction of your students when we discuss or you read the part when the Bellodi with the Carabinieri arrives on the bus and he asks if anyone's seen who killed Carlos Bernan, and you know, everybody, first of all, everybody then disappears, goes away, nobody wants to talk, omerta, right? So do you have a particular, because this is such, after your answer, I'll tell you what is the reaction of my students.
It often comes up that teaching and you kind of a behavior that you see that you, in many ways, you other, right? You say, oh yeah, other people do this. We would never do this. We would never be silent in front of injustice. And I say, well, can you please say that again? Because in what way are we omertosi in the United States, right? We are silent in the face of injustice every single day, right? And so literature as a mirror, right? You see something and it's easy to see when others do things wrong, right? But then I always remind them that literature is often a mirror held up, and we don't often like to see, right, what we see there. And so with omerta, I kind of always bring it back. It's like, is it just those Sicilians in the novel, or do we engage in similar behavior? And it comes up with all kinds of kind of questions. Teaching Flaubert, Salammbô, and we talk about human sacrifice and child sacrifice. I was like, well, we have our own forms in which we sacrifice children, right, to the NRA. We just don't talk about it in those terms. And so I think that makes literature alive, right? That it always, even if it is about a foreign country, written in a foreign language, it is always speaking to us on our own terms. And I think that has worked in the past. What is your reaction?
This is, again, students in the Bronx, Lehman College, the City University of New York. What we do is, when introductory discussion and when we go on that, I give them these pictures, say, okay, there is a stop of the subway just very close where we are, and say, okay, you are there, you're waiting for your train. While you're getting inside the train, somebody gets shot. What are you going to do? When the police come, what are you going to do? And they just read the passage, and I would say not all, but the majority would say yes. I completely, they are completely have solidarity with those Sicilians of the little village, because they say, and they say that's very interesting. They say it depends where the subway stop is. Okay, is here in the Bronx? I will not say anything. I will get out of the way. Is in the Park Avenue? I may stay. I may say something. It depends where the police are.
That makes
and that will
sense.
make the same thing to say, like, if the bus stop was in this little town that Sciascia doesn't even give us the name, but it's a little town in Sicily, or will be Parma or Milan. You take the same person that doesn't say anything to Bellodi there, but then if you transfer maybe in Parma, he will say something. It's the same state, right?
So thank you very much, Salvatore, for your talk, and especially for this discussion.
Thank you.
It's time to tell you thank you so very much. It's time to leave back with a lot of ideas and new energy that I think it's really important. But before we go and we shake our hand, hugging hopefully, I think it's important to start from the beginning. And the beginning was this homage to Leonardo Sciascia that we did, because in 2019 I was able, thanks to Francesco Izzo, to find at the Memorial Library in Madison, Wisconsin, the first publication ever made by Sciascia in the United States, so in 1952, for the People Encyclopedia yearbook published in Chicago, so the entry on Italian literature, that we presented the very first day of our American trip. So the first was the first day, that now I want to add my last words in the last day. And so here this is the entry that's in the original English text with an Italian translation I made, and then my text in which I try to reconstruct the reason why the young Leonardo, before being Sciascia in 1952, was asked to write an entry on Italian literature. And so that's really nice. At the end there is a note by Francesco Izzo quoting a letter that Leonardo Sciascia wrote to Pasolini at the end of 1952, saying that Chicago, a publishing house in Chicago, was asking him to write on Italian literature, and he was so kind to quote Pasolini's name as a young person of promised future, as actually he was. But that's not all. You need that. Like this, then you will have the chance, obviously, to look close. That's our gift. And then we have Portrait in Black. That's why we were presenting this cartella along with Teresa Fiore that is here at the Center Italian Modern Art the other day, because there is a great lithography from David Levine that was working for the New York Times. That's obviously in 1979, thanks to a review by Gore Vidal, he made this fantastic. Non è facile fare tutto ciò, per cui capite, voglio dire. Sto provando in tutti i modi, ma devo aver fatto. This caricature or not? That's the big question I will leave behind. But the fact that this is our Sciascia, that was the icon of our flyers, of our brochure, and And so once again we presented the achievement. There was a great occasion to know, at least for me, the work of Levin. He works on many Italian authors, and there was a little exhibition around this one with Roberto Calasso and Pierpaolo Pasolini and so many others Italian intellectuals that was crowned around Leonardo Sciascia. So this is our gift to the Istituto Italiano di Cultura. Oops. But I would like to conclude thanking you ever and ever, to thank Francesco Izzo. Please, can you come? Because if everything started, he is the man that can send 10,000 emails per hour. He is the man that sends voice messages of 37 minutes at 6 in the morning when you open your eyes. But this is the man that deserved to receive on my behalf the original copy.
You have
I have the original copy of the encyclopedia of 1952 for you. Where is Sciascia entries here.
Wow.
So thank you very much.
Thank you. May I add another voicemail here?
No.
I should really thank Valerio for the extraordinary energy put in this adventure. He was really able to interpret this international scope that our association would be, I would say, adventuring into.
Yeah.
And I think that really all this colloquium and the other initiatives saw him with a really, I would say, with a incredible energy at the service of an idea. So thank you very much for conveying this energy around, and clearly for the next challenges, because what happened today with all this beautiful presentation we had from Alessandro, from Salvatore, and from Giulia, really are really part of this transnational research team that will come back to 1 year, I think, or less, to this book that should be hopefully the 6th or the 7th after Joe Farrell monograph that was opening this week. So really, thank you, and thank you all.
Thank you. And don't forget, we will have the proceedings. We will have the proceedings that we will be publishing 1 year with Todo Modo, a second volume with Todo Modo. And guys, thank you very much. We will remember it.